going to read a little bit of something that's familiar to us all from 1 Corinthians 11, starting in verse 17. And I read from a Life Application Study Bible. It is a New International Version. Some of you may have a New International Version. Some of you may have other versions. But in this particular Bible, it has headings under different sections. And this heading has the title of the Lord's Supper. So that was a good place for me to start. And, Mike's the song leader once in a while, and Mike does announcements once in a while, and Mike tends to be the jokester. So much so that my neighbor Richie is probably always expecting something out of Mike the jokester. And a lady at work recently had misplaced her car keys. And she, Mike, did you take my car keys? And I'm like, why am I the first guy that always gets accused of something like that? Well, Mike's the practical joker. So it's kind of risky for the elders, and Richie makes out the schedule. It's kind of risky for Mike to do something serious, such as the Lord's Supper, but that's the portion that I'm going to do this morning. And I thought about it a lot because I've known since probably December when Richie put out the schedule that this was going to be my Sunday to do the Lord's Supper. And, this is a very meaningful time for our church, and a time that we set aside to observe the Lord's death and His burial and His resurrection. So for a practical joker to have this part of the service is pretty risky, but I believe in the Church of Christ there's a reason that we do everything. There's a reason that we have no instruments in our worship. We believe that the Scriptures teach us that. There's a reason that we have no infant baptism. We believe that the Scriptures teach us that. And things similar to that we have practices that are common in churches of Christ, whether it's the church here in Nebraska City or any church of Christ you could go to. You can kind of expect certain things. We do this because we're trying to follow the Bible instructions in everything we do, not just on Sunday morning. We try to follow the instructions 24/7. We come from different places. We have some different backgrounds. Perhaps we have some different church teachings. So I feel like, often is the case in the Church of Christ, no matter where you go, you see confusion arise a little bit when the Lord's Supper is passed, because some who are not of the Church of Christ may think that everyone should take it. And some who are not of the Church of Christ might think that infants should take it. Well, infants are using bottles, so we're not trying to have the infants participate because they can't drink of the cup. But sometimes there are children, there's confusion whether or not children should take or shouldn't take. And I'm not here this morning I'm going to leave that to John and the elders. If you have specific questions, please get with the elders. I'd like for everyone to be crystal clear on why we partake of this and why we do it the first day of every week. And I felt like in 1 Corinthians 11, starting in verse 17, just a couple of things I'm going to read from there. My Life Application Study Bible has footnotes that are pretty exhaustive, so I had gone through those and was going to read some of those footnotes, but we'd be here till well after probably 12:30 if I read through the footnotes. So again, I'd be happy to photocopy them and give people copies if they'd like. I think it was some helpful information for me. But starting in verse 17, 1 Corinthians 11, in the following directives, I have no praise for you, for your meetings do more harm than good. And we don't desire that. We want our meeting to do nothing but good here when we assemble on Sunday morning. In the first place, I hear that we come together as a church, there are divisions among you. And to some extent, I believe it. And that's going to happen from time to time. There are going to be divisions. There are going to be misunderstandings. No doubt there have to be differences among you to show which of you have God's approval. And then verse 23, for I received from the Lord what I also passed on to you. The Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, this is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me. In the same way after supper, he took the cup. This cup is a new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it in remembrance of me. For whenever you drink this bread, eat this bread, and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. Therefore, whoever eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of sinning against the body and blood of the Lord. A man ought to examine himself before he eats of the bread and drinks of the cup. For anyone who eats and drinks without recognizing the body of the Lord eats and drinks judgment on himself. I think a lot of my thought there was that if you were to examine yourself, again, obviously, a baby or perhaps a small child probably doesn't have the capability to examine themselves and try to think if they're worthy of partaking of the cup. So, in the Church of Christ, we don't say, if you're an infant, you can't partake. If you're 10 years old, you can. We don't have any age limitations on that, as well as baptism. We teach that, someone should understand what they're doing. That perhaps is why we don't sprinkle babies and we don't baptize infants. So, take this as a very serious time in our worship. And if you have any questions, again, I'm sure our elders would be more than happy to talk with you about it in detail. Let's go ahead and have a prayer for the bread this time.